least three ways the beginnings of Rome were explained. Number one, which certainly will be on the test, is the scientific explanation. Scientists tell us that Indo-European peoples by the name of the Latins, okay, came out of Indo-European land, whatever it was called, we don't know, I just went off the camera. Right here, down here, came across southern Europe, down, went further west than the Greeks, crossed the Alps, came down to Italy. All this takes hundreds of years. And they arrived in Europe approximately 1000 BC. They're right behind the Hellenes. Maybe they were even coming at the same time. Okay? They arrive in Italy, kind of ooze down the Italian peninsula over several decades, or many decades, and eventually settle in the Tiber, T-I-B-E-R, bonus question, River Valley, amongst the 7 hills, bonus question, and today the city of Rome still has 7 hills, I'm happy to know, and begin building a city there. Yes, ma'am.
Are you talking about the Romans or the Indo-Europeans?
The Romans are Latins who come from Indo-Europeans. Latins and Romans are the same thing because obviously you aren't a Roman until you build the city of Rome. Okay, all right? The second theory, as we talked about yesterday, was the theory of Livy. When Livy wrote his History of Rome, I need everybody's attention, please. When Livy wrote his History of Rome, he came up with this rather fantastic, but you can't be too. I mean, imagine 10,000 years from now, one of the few things that are left of our civilization is one of those Friday the 13th horror films. Okay? Well, it would be cool, but what kind of image would they have of us as a society? Okay, so, if you look at what's on our television set and in our movie theaters, it isn't particularly much more bizarre than this strange story that Livy wrote that culminates with the fact that there are 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus, okay, who are set adrift on the Tiber River with the hopes that they will just float away. Their little basket boat crashes into the shore. The 2 little kids crawl out, stumble up the bank. Along comes a rather large she-wolf. She suckles them, and they live happily ever after and eventually plow out the boundaries of Rome. And I mentioned to you yesterday that still to this day, standing on the Capitoline Hill in Rome, is the statue, and there it is. Okay? Now, this was one big wolf, okay, to be able to do this, but there it is. And the 2 little boys are underneath getting all ready, okay, for lunch. Now, the third story is Virgil's The Aeneid, which features a guy by the name of Aeneas, who is fairly similar to Odysseus in the Odyssey. Okay? Virgil writes his version of Homer's Odyssey. It's actually the last 6 chapters of the Odyssey that he takes and recasts in a book known as the Aeneid. And it's his version of how Rome, and he's arguing that Rome was founded by by Trojan soldiers after the fall of Troy. Okay? Now, those are 3 stories. The interesting thing about all 3 is this. When you do Virgil's story, or when you do Livy's story, you discover that if you do sort of the math and you figure out the things when approximately it has to be, is the year 0, the founding year of Rome, the beginning of the Roman calendar, the year the city of Rome was founded. That year is actually on the Christian calendar, 753 BC. Okay, or BCE if you want to say before Common Era. 753 BC. In the last 50 years, extensive archaeology has been done in Rome using carbon-14 and other advanced techniques. And that date looks pretty close. Okay? So the city of Rome was approximately 750 years old when Jesus was born. And of course, everybody knows that Jesus really, we don't think was born in 0, we think actually was born in 3 BC. The Christian calendar's off. Okay? And you know how they do that, don't you? To explain, I'm digressing, you don't need to know this, but some of you are giving me this. What is he talking about? You all know that the positions of the stars in the sky are mathematical and unvarying. Okay? You can, if you have the computer capacity and a really good electronic planetarium, you can turn the clock back. If you want to know what the sky looked like over Mount Vernon, Virginia, on the night that George Washington died, you can mathematically calculate exactly what somebody who stepped out on the porch as Washington was breathing his last breaths and looked up the sky, what the sky looked like on that night. Okay? You can mathematically figure out. Well, when they figure out what they think caused the great light in the sky, now some of you may think that that was a totally divine light, and if you do, that's fine. But some people, most people, I think, believe that it was a combination of stars that were so unnaturally bright that the 3 wise men used them as a guidepost when they were traveling at nighttime, because in that part of the world you often travel at night because it was cooler. And if you figure out, using again formulas in an electronic planetarium, there was an incredible conversion of stars that just happened in the year 3000 BC that would exactly approximate what was described in the Bible. So that's why modern historians think that Jesus might have been born in 3 BC, not actually the year 0. And when the Christians made up the calendars 500 years after Jesus Christ, they got it off by about 3 years. Who knows? Okay? But the thing I'm concerned that you know is you need to have down in your notes that in the year 0, on the Christian calendar, Rome was already a 750-year-old city. Okay? Very old. And would last, of course, as a Roman city for another 500 years. Now, if everybody understands that, what I want to talk about today is what exactly we did with the Greeks. I want to talk about what made Romans Romans. What made Romans Romans. And I'm going to talk about 6 things. We'll do 3 and take a break. Number 1. Romans spoke a different language than anybody else in Europe. That language they had spoken for a long time before they ever arrived in Europe, and that language is Latin. Okay? Latin is one of the great languages of the world. And before this unit is over, you're going to be able to at least talk for a minute or 2 in Latin. Okay? We're going to learn a few basic Latin phrases which are essential. A historian that I happen to know up in Ohio State has argued, and I think quite rightly, that to really understand a country, if you are going to become a historian in German history, shall we say, or Russian history, before you can understand the country, you have to speak the language. You cannot really understand what a country thinks when you're doing it in translation. Words just don't always translate. When a German says, meine Vaterland, my fatherland, the word fatherland is sort of lame in English, but for a German it has great meaning. Okay? And unless you know the language, you cannot really understand that. Okay? So we will just give you a little bit of Latin so that you at least know the Latin phrases that apply to Rome. Latin is what today?
Spanish?
No, well, I'll put you on hold for a second. What is the Latin language today? Dead. What's the correct word? Dead. What's the correct word? Extinct. You want to write down Latin as an extinct language? By extinct, we mean there's no little children growing up speaking Latin natively. No, little Petrus here isn't sitting on Granny's knee when he's about yay high, and Granny's talking to him in Latin, and he's beginning to absorb the language. No native speakers of Latin today. The only way you can study it is as a class. And I've worked for years with great lack of success to get Latin taught at this high school. I think if we taught Latin, we could raise our ACT scores 2 or 3 points. But I've never managed to convince anybody. Also, Latin teachers are hard to find. But Latin is a rich language. Today, about a half of the Latin language is in English. Almost every word, for example, that ends in IOUS is Latin. Okay, just to give you one example. Lots of Latin words in the English language. Very rich language. Now, Latin died about 1,000 years ago, but it had babies before it died. Can somebody give me a Latin language baby? Spanish, all right. Let's make a list, because on the test I will certainly ask you to give me some. Spanish, I don't care which ones you give me, there's about 6 or 7 of them. Spanish, French. Spanish and French are sister languages, cousins. Portuguese. Italian's the closest, obviously. It makes sense, it's where Latin was spoken originally. Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese.
Is Romanian one?
And Romanian. Romania is over here. Was in Roman times the province of Dacia. Okay? It's called today Romania, under where the country came from, with a name like Romania. The Romanian people look like Italians, and their language is very similar. It's the only language in Eastern Europe that's not Eastern European related. Okay? So Romanian, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. Okay? So if you're, anybody in here took like Spanish for a year or 2 and then changed to French or vice versa? Would that not be much easier, or would it be easier to go to Latin than to go to German? Because German is a whole different language family, okay? So that we call this a language family. You might write the language family, Latin, and then the baby languages, French, Spanish, Italian. Does anybody know the R word that we use for the Latin-based languages? Romance, thank you. Romance, R-O-M-A-N-C-E. The Romance languages, notice the word romance. The Romance languages today, again, are Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian. All right? Yes.
Why did they speak a different language than everyone else if they all came from Indo-European?
You know, if I answered that question, I'd write a book and make $1 million. Okay? All we know is that if you look at Greek, and if you look at Latin, and you keep going back and boiling things down to the basic root parts like roots and prefixes and suffixes, the 2 languages eventually merge together. Okay? And we're going to keep adding. There's about 6 or 7 more language families that they all go back to Indo-European. Okay? All right? Number 2, everybody understands language. That's one of the things that made the Romans, they spoke the Latin language. Number 2, second thing I'd like you to write down is the word P-A-T-E-R, F-A-M-I-L-I-A-S. P-A-T-E-R, and Ms. McCollister here is, you're going to get a prime example of what we were just talking about. P-A-T-E-R, F-A-M-A-L-I-A-S. P-A-T-E-R, F-A-M-A-L-I-A-S. Paterfamilias. Latin word. Paterfamilias.
Is it
Now,
A-I-S?
you look at the word paterfamilias. P-A-T-E-R-F-A-M-A-L-I-A-S. And tell me what that word means. Father, patra, papa, father. The Italian word for pope is papa. Okay. Father. Familius.
Family.
A father-centered family. You want to write down father-centered family. This is key. Star this one. And it explains lots of strange things. In Italy to this day. The Romans were a believer in father knows best. They believed in a very male chauvinist view of society. And they believed in a very, I love this part, older people are smarter and better view of society. You also will be joining Wes in the class next year. Okay?
But why me?
Well, you screwed up earlier. Father-centered family. They believe, for example, this is where the tradition, nobody, I don't think, particularly does this anymore. Well, I do actually know somebody in our family that did this. One of my cousin's sons did this. But the idea that you don't marry a girl until you go and ask the father's permission. That is an idea that goes straight back to that. You wouldn't have dreamed in Roman times. It was a total social, you would have been pariahs, social pariahs, socially unacceptable if you married without your father's permission. Okay? What you want to write down, in a Roman family, what father told you to do, you did. I don't care if you're 40 years of age. If your father was still living, you consulted with your father before you took action. Father-centered family. Now, please listen to me. Some of you are not focusing, Mr. Bills.
I'm focused.
When we study Roman government, you're going to ask questions about, my God, why did they do it that way? Why would any society give to the emperor, quote unquote, which is not a Roman term, we'll have to get that out of your mind, but we'll do that here in a little while. Why would you give the emperor the power that he did? He was the father of his nation. And as father, he had complete control over its citizens. Perfectly acceptable idea to them. If you don't buy that, look at the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not bashing Roman Catholics. I have several members of my family who are Roman Catholic. I'm not, but I highly admire the church, and I'll say that on several occasions because it did, yes, it made some mistakes in history, but it also has done a lot of good things. But the Roman Catholic Church to this day is still very pyramidal in shape. At the top, you have the supreme pontiff of the universal church, who is virtually an absolute monarch, at least in church affairs. Okay, and we will talk about the idea of papal infallibility. If the Pope makes a decision, not on what we're having for lunch, it's not those kinds of decisions, but if the Pope makes a decision, it is believed to be infallible. It is correct. He is the supreme pontiff, the ultimate male of the church. It's one of the reasons why the Catholic Church has real trouble with women going into high positions in the church. Very paterfamilias idea. Still don't like that? Try this. Do you know what country in the world was, in Europe, I shouldn't say the world, what country in Europe was the last country to allow divorce?
Romania.
Well, no. Italy. To this day, in Italy, women, you are not equal to men. Okay? It's the most male chauvinist country. Now, it's not as bad as it used to be, but it used to be a woman could not get a divorce. A husband, under rare circumstances, could have a marriage dissolved. But a woman, because it was father-centered. Okay? Young Italians are beginning to drift away from this, but young Italians are much more likely to this day to consult with their father before they do something about the young Americans. This idea is ingrained, the idea of paterfamilias, the father-centered family. Very Roman concept. Third thing, go away.
Roger Hallen and Haley Mullen to the office, please. Roger Hallen and Haley Mullen to the office.
Third thing before we take a break, number 3. Third thing is classes. As you might imagine, a society that is father-centered was automatically prone to having a rigid social system. The Romans started out with two social classes. The two social classes were patricians, and plebeians. Patricians and plebeians. A patrician was a member of the upper class. Probably maybe a fourth of society was patrician, never more than that. Okay, were members of the patrician class. They were the big landowning class. Land was all important in ancient Rome. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Patricians. All right? The word patrician is still in the English vocabulary. If you look up in any good dictionary, the word patrician is there, and to this day it means someone of upper class. Okay? I was saying, if I was talking about Jackie Kennedy, for example, I would say of all the first ladies in the 20th century, with the possible exception of Eleanor Roosevelt, Jackie Kennedy was the most patrician. She was, after all, Jacqueline Bouvier. If you know anything about New York, the Bouviers are several notches above us mere mortals. Okay? She came from a very distinguished family. Okay? Plebeians, on the other side, or if you prefer this, I'll take either answer on the test. Plebeians, on the other hand, you can also call them plebes. Plebeians were the lower class, the working class. Okay, people down at the bottom of the social heap. Now, at Madison Plains High School, we have freshmen. And I'm sorry, I have a poor freshman in here to do today. That's right in front of you. We have freshmen, which some of you here with okay. Mr. Eyes. Okay. We have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. Freshmen, we sometimes refer to around here as frogs. Okay. Yes, we do. We teachers do it.
Wait, you
Okay.
who has frogs?
Freshmen.
Oh,
There goes a little frog. Okay, all right.
Not what we call you guys.
But there are several high schools in this state, and the further east in the United States, the more frequently this is, that the freshman class is not referred to as freshmen, they're the plebeians. Okay? Oh, he's going to be a plebe next year at, I think about Woodbridge High School. Okay? I had good friends that lived outside of Washington, D.C., and their high school, Woodbridge High School, freshmen were referred to as plebes. At the United States Military Academy, the freshman class is officially known as the plebes. Okay, first year you're a plebe, and then you work your way up.
It kind of sounds like plebe.
Well, that's the idea. Okay, all right. Last of all, about 500 or 600 years into Roman history, they began to get a middle, what we would call middle class. These were people that were not just little worker bees, and they weren't the great landowners. They were people that had enough money they could buy something. It was the thing that differentiated you from being a nothing.
Somebody's gotta know that term.
Mr. Fett, you, sir, are a patrician. Okay? I like the toad. Very nice. And you are riding out to see Mr. Philippi over here. Actually, I should make it Mr. Philippi, because if he doesn't look like a Roman aristocrat, I don't know. His hair's right, his skin color is correct, he has the right color of eyes, and would you look over here and look at his bearing, his carriage. You have the best backbone of any young man in the school. Okay, all right? He looks like a Roman. And I can just see you doing this. Okay? You and Mr. Fett are right out to see some plebeians, and notice what I just said. What did you do? How did he get there? He rode out on a horse. Now, Mr. Pickens, I hate to tell you this. You, sir, are a plebe. Okay? They come riding out on their horse, looking down at you standing on the ground, you poor miserable plebe, and you are automatically at a disadvantage. Horse, plebe. Horse, up in the air, plebe. Now, middle, Robert Bilzer, you beat that.
I said, do they ride dogs?
See, I'm getting revenge on you because there's your dang camera and I'm standing over here. Now,
It's
okay.
not my camera, it's your camera.
I know, all right. Now,
Joke's on you.
the Romans, about 500 years into their history, some Romans began to get enough money. They weren't patricians, but they could afford to buy a horse. You tell me. We still use the term today when talking about anyone who is into horseback riding, etc. Not jockey. What kind of events are they, for example, at the yes, polo would be a prime example. E word. Equestrian. Exactly.
Yeah, I've used that word.
To this day, any horse-related activity is referred to as an equestrian event because equest is the beginning of the Roman word for horse. And that is what we call the middle class. So Rome had three classes of people: plebeians at the bottom, patricians at the top, equestrians in between. Okay, now you have to understand this when we get to Roman government. Okay, because the emergence of these equestrian people, however nice it might have been for them, screws up the Roman government. Yes?
Did you ever find like someone from the plebeian class become like the Caesar or whatever?
Not now, but later on it would become possible if you were a good enough soldier. You probably couldn't do it in one generation, but maybe your grandfather was a plebeian and you might rise to the purple, okay, emperor, within maybe 3 or 4 generations. In the beginning, no, they were all, for example, the first Caesars were all patricians way back, okay? Now, does anybody have any questions up to here? Are we okay? Who told me they were freezing to death? Have you ever warmed up?
Yeah.
Good, because I'm opening the windows at break. All right, I'm hotter than me. Let's stand up, stretch, say hello to your neighbors. If you need to use the bathroom, we got 2 hall passes back there. You got the other one back?
He's gonna ignore you.
No, when you start
I think it's because you were like, yeah! And after you said that, he's like,
believed in the beginning, in the days of the Republic, before the year 30 BC, and for some time after that, the Romans believed, this is number 4, believed in a multi-god, polytheistic religion. Their religious system was essentially, what are we having, the John Adams, Ben Franklin sequence back here? Yes. Okay, you know the story where John Adams and Ben Franklin shared a room. You know, 18th century taverns, you never had a room by yourself. They shared a room. Well, Ben Franklin, I get all these subjects. Ben Franklin was a man who believed in the importance of fresh air. To the point that he would often take what was called an air bath. He would strip naked and sit in front of an open window and let the air blow over him. Which is maybe an image you don't want.
I thought that was normal.
Wes, it might be for some of us. At night, there was a big debate in the 18th century about night air. Many 18th century people believed that the night air was the cause of illness. Now, when they would go out in the evening, they would cover a scarf over their nose and mouth so they wouldn't bring in breathe in night air. And I imagine if you lived in an 18th century city, you would think that that might be true because they probably stunk to high heaven with open sewers and all that sort of stuff. So the story is that John Adams, who believed in all the traditional stuff, and Ben Franklin were sharing this room, okay, in a tavern up someplace in New York. They went to bed one evening, okay, and Ben Franklin, being the elder of the two, had the window up about this far. And John Adams, I don't think so. He was reasonably modest. John Adams was lying there thinking, oh my God, this damp night air is blowing in on me. God only knows what I'll catch. And so as soon as Ben Franklin dozed off, he crept out of bed. You know, this is true because John Adams wrote it. Crept out of bed, put the window down, got back in. Ben Franklin wakes up a few minutes later and says, my God, this room feels close. Okay, oh, that Adams has closed the window. So as soon as he heard Adams had dozed off, he would get out. And this went on all night. They put up the window 6 or 7 times. So obviously we're having a Franklin Adams moment. Now,
Who won?
I don't really know. Maybe Adams did because he wrote it. Anyway, you want to write down that the ancient. Thank you, John. The ancient Romans. Also, you want to write down embraced. This will certainly be a test question. They also embraced all of the new Hellenistic ideas. They believed in Stoicism. There's a strong Stoic element in Roman society. They believed in cynicism. And the Romans were the ultimate Epicureans. No people enjoyed eating more than did the ancient Romans. Okay? The whole bulimic thing goes back to the ancient Romans. The idea you ate until you were absolutely full and then you excused yourself, went to the lavatorium and threw up and then started all over again. Made yourself. Yeah, or lavatorium, either one. Okay? So they were great into overindulgence. All right? So that is all true. However, if you read the Romans, okay, 100 AD, 50 AD, 50 BC, there was beginning to be a definite tiring of this whole multi-god religion. And some historians have argued, now some of you believe, okay, and I may believe that our personal beliefs don't matter. Some of us may believe that the reason Jesus Christ triumphed and Christianity was a success was divine intervention. Other people, other historians would argue was Rome was ripe for somebody like Jesus Christ. Because by the time he comes along, there was such dissatisfaction, such tiredness, terrible word, with the existing multi-god religion that it made the rapid spread of Christianity, which was novel and new and had so many virtues to it, made it very, very, very likely to happen. Okay? So I don't know, but take away from this whatever you want. But certainly the multi-god, and by the way, of course, the Roman equivalent of Zeus is Jupiter. Okay? The Roman god of war is Mars. The Roman god of the sea and the navy is Neptune. Okay? Those are 3 I think you should know. Jupiter, Mars, Neptune. And of course there were many, many gods. And later on, who automatically became a god in most instances on his death? Mars is war, Neptune is sea, Jupiter is the supreme god. Who automatically? Robert?
I just have a question.
Then hold just a second. Let me get my point finished and I'll take any question you have. Who automatically became, this is the crux of the reason the Christians are going to be persecuted. Pardon me? It's not a particular person, it's a title, position in society. The emperor. Okay? Emperors became frequently gods on their death. Not every one of them, but the major ones. The famous line of Claudius, who was about the 5th emperor of Rome, okay? As Claudius lay on his bed dying, okay, he said the last words that he ever said to the people around him is, I think I feel myself becoming a god. And he died. Okay? I think I feel myself becoming a god. Okay? Now, while we're on this subject, some of you are looking at me. What is the connection? Stop and think for a moment. Okay? Mr. Mitchell, look at that look. This is Mitchellus Flavius Sabatius Maximus. He is the emperor. This man right here is a good Roman. And he worships you, maybe in your lifetime, certainly after your death, and all of the other emperors of any distinction as God. And you suddenly have this person come along right over here who says, there is only one God, and I will have no other gods before thee. Christians. And your reaction, your imperial majesty, is persecute the heck out of you. The Romans, I hope you hear this, what I'm saying, because sometimes you don't quite pick this up in church. The Romans actually had a reputation for being very tolerant religiously. They really didn't care what most religions were inside the empire, as long as that religion would accept the idea that the emperor was a god. So if you were some native religion and you had 65 gods, what the heck? Add another one on. Okay? Keep the emperor happy. Okay? And the Romans wouldn't persecute you. They would let you practice your religion. But when you said, no, not worshiping the emperor, you were committing political heresy. Okay? The emperor was God incarnate on this earth. He was one of the gods. And so the Roman state could not allow Christians to exist. And that's why the Christians were so mercilessly persecuted by the Romans. Number 5, let's get this done, and we'll only be one behind, we'll stop. Number 5, the Romans were agrarian. They loved the farm. Okay? A Roman walked in, he would love the idea that this high school is out in the country. And they loved this image. Now got Mr. Kilbarger back there looking over his account books on his great plantation. The Romans didn't have plantations, they had manors. Okay? He is working on his great plantation, his manor outside of Rome. He is a patrician. Okay? And news comes in. Robert Bills comes riding into the courtyard of your home and says, the enemy has crossed the Rhine. Rome is being threatened. The Senate has called all patricians to the colors. And you put down your farm stuff, you put on your body armor, you put on your helmet, you strap on your sword, you get on your horse, and you ride off into battle. And when victory is won, what do? You come home to the farm, put it all away, and once again become a farmer. Now, I have 2 questions for you, and we're done. If we don't get them done, we'll finish these 2 tomorrow. But here's the first one. If you understand this, you are a good historian. What great American consciously went back to the farm? George Washington. Good job. George Washington didn't need, please don't shut me, didn't need Mount Vernon. Could have remained president forever, could have remained general forever. But twice in his life he publicly said, like my Roman forefathers, because remember the 18th century loves things Greeks and Roman. Like my Roman forefathers, I, George Washington, I'm going home and becoming a farmer again. Make sure I talk about Cincinnati tomorrow. See you later.
I didn't finish it, but And then when you write that down there, and if you get it right, then we'll hand you the purple sheet where it has all the other equations on it. With everything.
We just have to know the first equation?
Yeah. Yeah, that's all you have to know is the VF equals VI plus AT. And if you know that when you get it right, he'll hand you this purple laminated sheet that he's obviously been using for a while. And he gives it to you and has all the other ones. And it's pretty easy. I showed up like 20 minutes late to class though, so I didn't get all of it done. Of course. Yeah. I'm starting to realize there's more time.
Yeah.
Your camera still.
Was the camera still on?
Yes.
Mr. Harold, our camera is still working here. Did Robert? Are you turning it off each day, or Robert?
Robert's supposed to be doing
Do you want me to turn it off?
it.
Really
Yeah,
quick?
just would.
Yeah, you just push the power.
Robert is not the most reliable, I'm afraid, technician.
He's good at the inventing. He's like Thomas Edison, but the day-to-day stuff.